Welcome to another episode of Mysteries Unknown. In tonight's podcast, I've got Toby with me, and he had a really scary encounter with Bigfoot back in the 80s when he was camping with some buddies in Oklahoma. They had a really long night. You guys don't want to miss this encounter. Things got pretty scary, but before we jump into that, I just want to say thanks again for all your support, for liking and subscribing to this podcast. And I always say it, but without you guys, this would not be possible. But let's just jump right into the story. Toby, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I'd love to tell my story.
I'm excited for you to go in here and share your story. I know we've been talking for a minute, and this is a really interesting story. It's not very far from where I'm located. So why don't you just take us back? It's been about 30 years, but take us back to Oklahoma and walk us through the encounter.
Three friends and I, it was supposed to be four friends, went camping along a creek that we never went camping on before. It was between Westville and Watts, Oklahoma, on Highway 59, about, I'd say, a mile and a half north. We got settled in on the creek. The friend that was supposed to bring the majority of the food didn't show, but my friend and I caught a lot of fish and crawdads. So, we were doing good on the creek bottom. And we were having fun, talking, had a fire going. Nighttime set in. And it was one of the biggest full moons you'd ever see. It was huge. You could see everything almost as plain as day. Everything was just in a blue light. And one of my friends, Mike, looked into the hayfield that was on one side of the creek and saw four figures. And he pointed them out to us. So we all stepped out of the firelight and got into the dark and started looking, and we saw four of them. Two of them, the two adults were walking about 15 foot apart from each other, and there were two little ones, different heights, walking in between them. And we were kind of bewildered because they looked really tall, and you could actually, with the moonlight, you could see their hair kind of blowing in the breeze. We knew they wasn't wearing clothes. We could see their hair kind of just like moving. And they just kept shuffling across the hayfield and went toward the creek, probably about 300-400 yards from us. And we went back to our fire immediately. I mean, we were all between like 15 and 17 years old, just in high school, junior high, friends that had grown up together. And we went back to our camp because we're backwoods types. We always have like tomahawks and knives and everything. So we grabbed our stuff and we just kind of kept close to the fire. Nothing really happened after that for about, I'd say, 45 minutes, maybe an hour. And that's whenever it started to get a little scary. Rocks started flying into our camp. About, golf ball size, maybe a little bit bigger than that here and there. And then we heard the tree knocking, just that everyone talks about. And then we started hearing the howling. We got scared, but we were in the middle of the woods. I mean, there was basically those hay fields and on our side of the creek, and then it was 20-foot bluffs on the other side of the creek. And the trail that we walked in on was on those bluffs. It was a very narrow and winding trail. So we couldn't actually hike out in the middle of summer, just afraid of all of the snakes and everything and not being able to see. So we just built our fire higher and stayed close to it and stayed together. We kept hearing the howling. And at one point, my friend Anthony said, "Look up." And we looked up on the bluffs about 15, 20 foot above us. We saw a clear face looking down at us. And it's kind of comical. It kind of looked like Harry from Harry and the Hendersons, only not so nice and goofy. It looked kind of angry. And then further down the creek, we heard a loud roar and we heard wood snapping like you would not believe. And the only thing that we could do, that we could think to do, was keep the fire going high and just stay together with any kind of weapon that we could make. We even like made makeshift spears. I mean, we were kids. We had no idea what we were doing. That morning, I don't think we really slept. Curiosity got the best of us. We went out into the hayfield and we saw where they walked through, and it was a pretty big path. And then we walked down the creek where we heard the roar and the tree snap, or the wood snapping, and we found a cedar tree, probably about a foot in circumference, uh, had been snapped completely in half, and you could see in the embankment the feet pushing into the red dirt, and that it had laid that tree over.
That's a pretty scary encounter, Toby. I can imagine that you guys didn't get much sleep that night. I know a lot of people that have these encounters. They talk about a feeling of fear or dread, or they get sick maybe, or they smell something. Did you guys feel anything, before you saw them, or maybe during or after?
We didn't feel anything before. I mean, the only thing that alerted us to it was Mike spotting them in the field. We didn't smell anything, but I got to say that the wind was blowing against us. Like, I think we were upwind. Like, the wind was blowing against our backs toward them. We did start to get a little bit of smell, almost skunky type smell, whenever we saw that one on the bluff, but it still was kind of faint.
It's I think it's one of those things that a lot of people talk about it being type like sweat glands, where they can turn that on and off. But regardless, man, I think to me the scariest part of that encounter is that I'm just going to call it the alpha male, because that's probably what it was. Standing on that bluff watching you guys, he's probably just making sure you guys stay in the camp because his family was there. But have you been back to that site since that encounter?
No, we haven't. I kind of wanted to go back, but none of my friends wanted to go with me.
Well, I wonder why. Right? I would have, because you were kind of stuck. You couldn't go anywhere. It was too dark to leave. And I can imagine that was probably one of the longest nights of your life. And a lot of times people want to focus on the details of Bigfoot, and I care about that. But man, how has that changed your life? How did that affect you?
Well, I always kind of believed in them in the first place, but I mean, when you got solid proof in your mind, you see it, and they are scary. I mean, to see, a cedar tree snapped in half like that, it's humbling. It's scary, but I mean, I don't know. It makes me more curious. I've got my theories about Bigfoot, but I want to keep looking.
I think a lot of people are that way. I know for me, when I had my experience, it really piqued that interest anymore. And I call this a world, because once you get into this world, you kind of get sucked into it, and the rabbit hole just gets deeper. But, I'm always curious to know what people think, because nobody really knows. But what do you think Bigfoot is? What's your opinion? What are your thoughts on it?
I honestly think that it's just and when I say undocumented, I'm saying that loosely because there are plenty of sightings, plenty of stories. But I do believe that it's just an undocumented great ape. I don't believe in any of the, there's like paranormal or extraterrestrial or, any of those theories. Those people, I'm not going to insult them, but I don't believe that's not what I believe. I think that it's just an undocumented great ape. The silverback gorilla, what had the same story behind it until like the 1890s, whenever it was actually discovered.
Well, that would make a lot of sense. It would answer a lot of things, because especially there's all kinds of places across the U.S. that are so rural that we've still not explored all of. And I'm very familiar with the area that you're talking about, that you had that encounter. It's a really rural area. For our listeners, why don't you describe that area for them? Kind of give them a picture of what that area is like.
We had to walk down that 20-foot bluff, like winding little narrow trail, to get to the creek, jump the creek, to the gravel bar. And then on the other side of the creek was those hay fields. And there was an old dirt road. There were maybe like one or two houses, like here and there, a couple 100 yards apart from each other. But behind that was a lot of really thick wooded area that a person really couldn't get through easily.
So it's a perfect place for them to hide. I mean, if they're going to be somewhere, that's a good place for them to do it, because there's probably not going to be too many people they come across, you know. So I could see that. But, you know, it's a really scary experience. I'm glad you're still here to share it, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on and share it with my audience. And I know you're curious about Bigfoot, so, I mean, I think I know the answer to this question, but if you had the opportunity to see it again, would you want to?
Yes, I actually have a line on looking for another one. I have a friend, or not a friend, but a guy that works at a gas station close to me. We've talked and he saw my Bigfoot shirt and commented that south of his house, he hears the roaring and tree knocking, and he lives just south of Devil's Den, Arkansas. And he said I could park in his driveway and go looking.
You're liable to find it, especially out there. I hike out there all the time. It's a really rural area, and there's no telling what's out there. So I would love to hear how that goes, man. So keep me posted on that. If you get the opportunity to do that, I would love to hear all about it. So
just looking for a couple of friends to want to go hiking with me. I don't want to do it alone.
Well, guys, you heard it here. If you want to go look for Bigfoot and you're close to Arkansas, Toby's ready. So that would be great. It sounds like a lot of fun, man. And I appreciate you for coming on here, and thank you so much for just being on the podcast, man. I know our audience is really going to enjoy your story.
I just regret the fact that when it happened, we didn't have this cell phone technology we did today. If you wanted to use the phone back when I was a kid, you were tethered to the kitchen wall with a long curly cord.
Different time, man. It was a totally different world. I know, man. And I bet you wish you would have had it. But, you know, a lot of people who say that and have them on them today, when they see this thing, they're too scared to pull that phone out of the pocket and take that picture. So I can totally understand that. But thanks again for coming on the show. Guys, if you have a mystery or something you want to send to me, you can send it to me by email at video@jscreativear.com. And like I always say, stay prayed up. We'll see you in the next episode.